So thank you, Bob, for doing that scripture reading. And, today's the first Sunday of Advent. And as Christians, we don't rush towards Christmas. We kind of take our time. And that's different from what all the shopping malls and the radio stations have been doing, who kind of decided that Christmas started right after Halloween, really, right? November 1st. Wow, it must be Christmas time. Well, we sort of take our time and we go there slowly. And our goal is to be reminded that Christ's arrival as a baby child in Bethlehem was the end of a long, long period of expectation. And in today's readings, we heard one of those prophecies that is contained in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, where the prophet Jeremiah talks about a promise that is made to the people of Israel when they are in captivity in Babylon. Now, the Babylonian captivity happened in the late 6th century, and what happened was the Babylonians attacked Jerusalem. They besieged it for many months, and then they finally broke through the walls, and they came inside the city, and they sacked the city, they destroyed the temple, and they scattered the people. The royal court was dragged off to Babylon, which is now if you wanted to find Babylon on a map, you just have to go a few miles outside of what is now Baghdad in Iraq. The rest of the Jewish people who had been living in Jerusalem were dragged down to Egypt. So Jerusalem itself was left as a ghost town. There were very, very few people left there. It became covered in weeds, and the people stayed away for 70 years. And they didn't know if they were ever going to be coming back. It seemed as though the entire Jewish project, Jewish civilization was finished. For them, what held them together as the Jewish people was their faith in God, but God's house had been desecrated by the Babylonians, had been destroyed. So they went, well, who are we as Jews if we can't worship in Jerusalem? So it seemed like the whole thing was over. And the people that they met believed that time was fixed by the gods. The Babylonians had their own gods, of course. And in Babylon, there were these massive, massive things which looked like pyramids, which were called ziggurats, where huge idols, like imagine a statue that's 20 or 30 feet high, and priests coming in 3 or 4 times a day to offer food to it. That's how the Babylonians conducted their religion. And the Babylonians believed that the gods were in charge of everything that happened. You couldn't win a war without the gods' favor. So how did you know what the gods wanted? Well, they deduced that they would notice that, okay, the last time we went to battle against the Egyptians, the stars were in this particular type of alignment. The moon was in that position, the zodiac was in that position. That must mean that that particular alignment of stars is what the sky looks like when the gods are in favor of waging war. So let's make sure that if we're going to wage war against the Egyptians again, that the stars are in that kind of alignment. Because if the stars are in an alignment which went along with a defeat, well, we don't want to wage a war when the stars are aligned as they looked the last time we were defeated. So the Babylonians took these incredibly intricate astronomical records. For over 1,000 years, they recorded every lunar eclipse, every solar eclipse. And astronomers looking back are just amazed at how accurate their records were. But they kept them because they were trying to discern the will of the gods. The ancient Greeks, at the same time as that prophecy was written, also had an idea that the gods were in charge in life. You may have read some ancient Greek tragedies when you were in high school, right? Oedipus Rex or Antigone. If you remember Oedipus Rex, that's the story of Oedipus, a man who it is prophesied, well, basically what happens is the city of Thebes has a plague. And the reason it has a plague is because there's a man in the city who has, it's been prophesied he will sleep with his mother, like have sex with his mother, and kill his father. And when Oedipus, who is ruling the city, realizes that, oh, they might be talking about me, and he finds out after the fact that, my wife is actually my mother, oops. He goes, well, I'm not going to kill my father, of course. So I don't know who my father is, but there's no way I'm going to kill him. So he tries to escape the city, but through a case of mistaken identity, he does kill his father. And the whole point of a Greek tragedy is when the gods have decided how things are going to go, there is nothing you can do about it. All you can do is fit into what the gods have already decided. That's why it's a tragedy. That's the tragedy of human existence, as far as the Greeks were concerned, that we're just stuck with the way things happen. And a lot of Greeks believed that time was cyclical, so the fact that you're going through it now means that in the future, your future self will go through it again. Our society, many thousands of years later, is once again being drawn into these ideas of fate. We don't refer to gods. The Egyptian and Babylonian gods are long gone, as are the Greek gods. But we refer to more earthly conditions. Everywhere we look, advertisements and Instagram posts tell everyone, especially women, that the way you look is your destiny. If you want to get ahead in this life, you better be beautiful. And if you're not beautiful, you're stuck. Your body's curves, your cheekbones will decide whether you're popular or ignored. And for racialized people, especially people who don't have white skin, it often seems like the world takes one look at their skin color and decides what's possible for them in life. In the United States right now, there are 9 states who have passed laws forbidding their schools from teaching children about critical race theory, which is the theory which says that racism isn't just something which individuals do, but entire systems can make racism happen and perpetuate it. It is against the law to teach that idea in 9 states in the US, and there's another 19 states who have similar laws on the books that will probably be passed. Denying that racism exists is an excellent way to be sure that it does persist. And the goofy thing about this, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, is that the system is saying there's no such thing as systemic racism, and I'll prove it by making sure you can't talk about it. Whenever we tell ourselves that what exists now is all that can exist, we are resurrecting those old ideas of fate. 2,500 years ago, as Bob read to us, the Jews were living among those star-reading Babylonians. But the Jews had a very different idea of fate. In today's reading, we hear God's message to them. Don't give up. As bad as it is, you still have a future. You have a future where you're going to be able to return to Jerusalem. That what is now weeds and ruins will once more be a home to flocks and shepherds and laughing children. And there's another prediction in this, not only that they'll return to Jerusalem, but that a king will be born in David's line out of the root of Jesse. Jesse was King David's father. A king who will bring these people close to God once more. The scripture is introducing the idea of hope for these people who think that everything is lost. And that idea is not just about what's going to happen in the future, which is just a prediction, but it has the power to change how we live now in the present. Psychologists tell us there's basically 2 types of happiness. The first kind of happiness is obvious. It's when something good happens to you, and you go, hey, that makes me happy. Right? You get a phone call, someone you love is having a baby, or you get a promotion, or you get a good mark on an exam, or maybe an appliance that you've been struggling to fix finally works, right? Or maybe a project that you were sewing finally gets finished and someone walks by and says, hey, that's beautiful, and it makes you happy, right? So there's the happiness of the moment of something good that's happening. But there's another type of happiness. And that type of happiness is when you anticipate a good thing happening, right? So let's take a concrete example. Christmas. Show of hands here in the room, how many people start planning for Christmas before December? Yep, lots of hands go up. How many people started before October. Yeah, there's the hand there. This happens, right? For some people, Christmas starts around August, right? They're planning, they're into Christmas long before Christmas comes. And they don't know if it's going to be a good Christmas or not. They don't know if the turkey's going to be burned and some, public health regulations can make it impossible to get together. But they're just living in the happiness of Christmas months in advance. Some people do this with trips. In our house, there's this joke that I don't get happy about a trip until I'm on the plane. I'm not very good at planning ahead with my happiness. Whereas the women of my household, man, once that trip is even an idea, they start planning and they start looking online, and the trip is happening long before we get on the plane. Right? There's things to buy. There's, places that we could go. Oh, let's reserve a dinner there. There's all sorts of things. So the trip is alive in their hearts and making them happy months before we actually go on the trip. And again, they don't know if the trip's going to turn out well. Maybe it'll get canceled, right? Or maybe, you'll get sick with some sort of local bug and it'll be terrible. But they've had a couple of months of pure happiness, right, when they think about the trip, just because they assume the trip's going to work out. So this anticipation of a happy event is known as hope. The belief in something good that has not happened yet. The belief that good things are possible despite all the present evidence. Because there are times when reason tells you there's nothing to look forward to. It's just going to be bad, right? And the ancient Israelites must have felt that way during their captivity in Babylon. No one told them when they could go back. The Babylonians didn't say, we're only borrowing you. They said, nope, you're conquered. You come into our society and you just make do. But just when they thought they were finished as a people, God gave them hope in the form of this prophecy. God planted a seed, a hope that they would be able to return home. And that hope gave them a reason to keep going for decades, to see beyond the dark horizon of just tomorrow. And that part came true. After 70 years, they were able to return to Jerusalem. And the Persian Empire conquered the Babylonians, and the Persians looked at the Jews and said, go home. We don't have a beef with you. So they went home. And they even got support from the Persians to rebuild the temple. But the prophecy that we heard today, and this is why we hear it on Advent 1, is because it has a much longer-term seed in it. It promises to provide a king from David's line who will be the Messiah, the long-awaited anointed one who will bring peace and a closeness to God that was unprecedented. And as Christians, we believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah that was predicted by these prophecies. A man born in King David's line. The one who not only fulfilled a hope, but became known as the hope, the light of the world, which is why we light Advent candles, and why we light a candle for every church service. Jesus came as the one who didn't believe that time was fixed, that every moment was predetermined by the gods. He didn't arrive and say, this is the only thing that's going to happen. Just get your popcorn and watch. Instead, he said, no, there's a different way of living that I want you to learn and appreciate and experience. He offered hope everywhere he went. He healed people that everyone else had given up on. He healed people who had been dismissed as nobodies by their society. He encouraged us to put aside anger and fear and embrace love instead. When people are afraid and angry, we can't think straight, can we? Think about when you've had an argument with the kids or with your spouse or with a friend. When you're angry, you get just dumb. You can't think of as many ideas. The world closes in on just this one thing, and then when you're angry, you start pulling things out of the air to justify how angry you are, and you get your facts wrong, and you get things all twisted up. Nobody makes a good creative decision when they're angry. You can shut something down with your angry, but it's very hard to open things up and to come up with something new when you're angry. When we're relaxed and non-judgmental, we can see someone who appears to be an enemy as a future ally. We can see someone who's angry at us as not someone who is an enemy or someone who is misbehaving, but as someone who comes from a place. It's like you can pull back the curtains and see what brought them to that moment. And you go, oh, yeah, it's hard being there. It's hard being who you are right now. I can see why you're angry. And you don't take it so personally. Love isn't just a moral imperative, something that you click off a list. Love is a cognitive state. It's a way of being that makes us more effective as human beings. When you can feel love and compassion for someone, you see the world more clearly than you do when you're angry and fearful. It's a way of being that Jesus encourages us to be in, because that will make us better human beings, the human beings we're supposed to be. Running around being angry and bitter is not our inheritance. That's when we're forgetting about our inheritance. Our inheritance is to be the people who have hope, the people who believe every situation could be better. We're the people who are gifted with the promise of, if we can be loving towards ourselves and others, we can make this world a better place, the kind of place that God asks us to help it with. Christianity as such marks a shift in world culture, a new belief in hope. Those Greeks did not believe in hope. That's why they wrote tragedies. The Babylonians didn't believe in hope. They just believed in reading the sky to see what they could get away with. Where are the gods going? Okay, I'll try and go in that direction. But not, let's change things to make it better. No. Let's just try and squeeze in between the lines of what the gods are already doing. Christians, however, think of what our book says. Peter, he's in the courtyard. The girl asks him, hey, you've got a Galilean accent. Are you with that Jesus guy they've arrested? And he goes, oh, not me. And he denies he even knows Jesus 3 times. And yet he's the one that the church is founded on, because he repents of that, and Jesus says, I'm going to make you the rock on which this church is based. A man who had to change. He messes up, he's forgiven, and he goes forward. Saul persecutes the early Christians. He goes around killing them. He's on the road to Damascus to hunt down more Christians, when suddenly he has a vision. He sees Jesus, and Jesus says, why are you persecuting me? He falls down blind. He recovers after a few days, and his life is completely changed, and his name changes from Saul to Paul. And if you take the New Testament and you look at all the pages, more than half of those pages are written by Paul, that guy who used to kill Christians. Change is what we are all about, because we have hope. We believe people can be better because we've seen it, and we make it happen. Hope is what gives us the courage to say, I think things could be better. God promises us, if we follow God's way and live by love and compassion, we can make things happen that would shock and amaze those Babylonians and Greeks and everybody else who thinks that fate is fixed. We can make this world a paradise with God's help. As we rely more and more on computer models, right, for climate predictions and economic models, we should keep in mind the importance of hope. As long as human beings are part of the equation for creating the future, whether it's how we affect the climate or our economy, it matters a lot how common people feel. A pessimistic population will make very, very different decisions than an optimistic one. If we're to successfully face the challenges that lie ahead in our world, we're going to do much better if we're hopeful. Just this week, the Green Team had a book discussion of a book called Regeneration. And early on in its pages, the author points out that the most recent chair of the International Panel on Climate Change had said, you know what? The science now shows us that if we can get our economies to a carbon neutral position, right, where whatever carbon we put up into the air, we're neutralizing by growing new plants, both in the sea as well as on land. If we can bring down our carbon emissions, it'll only take a few decades for the Earth to fix itself. That's amazing. That's an outcome worth having. And that, we're trying to get carbon neutral by 2050. A couple of decades later is 2070. Aiden and Charlotte will see that world. They can see that world. And we can help them get there, where everything goes back to normal, and BC's not cut off by massive storms. Hope is what we need to hang on to. Hope is the thing that will get us through, because it'll make us so much more creative when facing these problems. And so, as we enter Advent, let's embrace the hope that Christ has given us. Hope that doesn't flow from the world as we see it, but flows from God's promise to us. From the way God sees the world, where there's all sorts of possibilities branching out at any point. For God saw shepherds and their flocks in a place that was just ruins and weeds. And that gave the Israelites the hope, the emotional courage they needed to actually wait and return to be there. And let us hope that we will be open to hope, both this month and in the years to come. Amen.